Hey all, this is Professor Steve back from Grand Canyon University here, and my next video here is basically you've got VMware Workstation 14 set up, or installed rather, and what do you got to do to set it up? There's some settings and preferences and things to that effect that you'll want to make sure that you look at and make sure those are configured correctly. So what I've done is I've already launched VMware Workstation 14, and the system, because when I went through the installation I set it up so that it would check for updates automatically, has basically said, hey, I've got an update. And so I can either do the update now, or I can skip it, or remind me later. So in this instance, I'm just going to do a remind me later so I can get through the rest of the video as far as setting up your settings. So we're going to hit remind me later, and we'll get back to it here. So when you initially opening preferences, and I'll kind of start over real quick here, but if you go to edit preferences, you'll kind of get back to this area. And one other thing I'll note, whenever you put your license in, it'll tell you on your main page how many days you have left in your particular evaluation period. So make sure you keep an eye on that, because the purchase from on the hub store from the other video is not a license forever. It does expire after so long. So on this initial preferences page, there's really a couple pieces to pay attention to. The default location for virtual machines. This is where it's going to store all the files related to your virtual machines. You can see mine is tucked underneath my user account, documents, and then virtual machines. You can certainly change that, and I would probably recommend that. Put it on your external storage, or second hard drive, or even your regular C drive, but just not underneath your users folder. Should your user profile ever get corrupted or get blown away for whatever reason, you don't want your virtual machines to be kind of stuck in that area as well. So you can certainly change that. One other thing is keep VMs running after Workstation closes. So this would be helpful if you didn't want the application running all the time, and you wanted to connect to your virtual machines, but not have the program open. Kind of a persistence type of thing. So you can set that if you would like to. Certainly up to you. Memory, reserved memory. How much host RAM should the system be able to reserve for all running virtual machines? So what I can tell you here is that I have 8 gigabytes installed in my machine. You could have more, you could have less. 8's about the right number. So this slide bar basically says how much memory am I going to allow maximum for my virtual machines, because I don't want to give away all my memory. My system still has to have some memory to operate correctly. So you can pick and choose a number. If in these classes, like for example ITT 121, you're going to have at most 2 virtual machines running to actually do the assignments and things of that effect. I usually recommend 2 gigabytes each per virtual machine. So I would have, if you take 2, and this is in megabytes here, so we have to do a little bit of calculation. So there's 1024 megabytes in a gigabyte. So if I want 2 gigs of memory per virtual machine, that's 2048 megabytes. And I have 2 of those running, so I have to multiply that by 2. Now we're to 4096. So if I do right here 4096, and hit tab, it's going to say basically I'm going to allow you to use 4 gigs maximum on your virtual machines, and then the other 4 gig is used for your system. And that's usually a pretty good number. You can certainly adjust it. Maybe you wanted to give 3 gigabytes each, and then you would still have 2 gigs available in my particular example. So we'll leave everything right there. In devices, Nothing crazy going on there. Updates, this is where you kind of check to see if there was, specify that you wanted to check for updates automatically. Automatically update VMware tools on a virtual machine. We'll go ahead and check that. This seems like a pretty good idea. You want to make sure those VMware tools are up to date all the time, just to make sure your devices are working correctly. In VMware, you have the ability to pass a flash drive into the virtual machine. So you could, if you have a file that you're working on that you need to get into the virtual machine, you can plug the flash drive into your host computer. This would be my desktop, and then VMware, assuming you're on the window there, will say, hey, we've detected a new device. Would you like us to pass it into the virtual machine? And you could say yes or no. Display, auto fit the window. Everything pretty much here looks pretty straightforward. Hotkeys, you can play around with those. One thing's to note, so whenever you click in a virtual machine window, and you actually launch a window, and you actually click into the virtual machine console window, your VMware is actually grabbing control of your keyboard and mouse, so that any commands that you issue on your keyboard or mouse are actually in the virtual machine and not your host machine. So one of the key commands to remember is to release control from the virtual machine. You hold down Control and Alt at the same time, and basically that releases your keyboard and mouse from the virtual machine window. And to get back to it, all you got to do is just simply hit click back into it, and then you're good to go. Another important keystroke is if you are trying to send the Control-Alt-Delete command into a virtual machine. If you hit Control-Alt-Delete on your keyboard, whether the keyboard and mouse is attached into the VMware window or not, it will actually trigger the Control-Delete command on your desktop, not the virtual machine window, and that can get kind of irritating. So what you can do is do Control-Alt-Insert. The Control-Alt and Insert keys at one time is the equivalent of passing in the Control-Alt-Delete command into the virtual machine. So just something to keep a remembrance of. All the other settings here, we're just going to leave as is, hit OK, and you'll probably get a user account control, which is what I've got right now. That says the VMware is trying to do administrative privileges, and you just say yes, and then you're good to go. So that's the video for actually doing some initial configuration of your virtual machine VMware console or window. So that's all for this particular video. You can stay tuned and watch another video that's going to be actually creating your virtual machines and being able to access them. So stay tuned, and we'll see you next time.